In the summer of 1989, in a laboratory just south of Miami, a plant pathologist named Randy Plotz opened a package that had just arrived from Taiwan. This was nothing unusual for him. Plotz spent his career collecting banana diseases the way other people collect stamps, and strange soil samples from far-flung plantations landed on his desk on a fairly regular basis. He prepped the sample, slid it under his microscope, and looked down. And something was wrong. He'd seen Panama disease before. Every banana pathologist had. It was old news, a problem the industry thought it had already solved decades earlier. But what was staring back at him through the eyepiece wasn't behaving like anything he recognized. He sent it off for genetic testing, and when the results came back, they confirmed what his gut had already been telling him. This wasn't an old enemy wearing a new face. This was something new. Something that, as far as anyone could tell, had just learned how to do the one thing everybody assumed it never could. They would come to call it Tropical Race 4, and more than 30 decades later, it is quietly, relentlessly doing something that very few pathogens in the history of agriculture have ever managed to pull off. It is eating its way through one of the most important food crops on the planet, and nobody, not the scientists, not the biggest agribusiness companies on Earth, not 3 generations of plant breeders, has found a way to truly stop it. If you're a fungi enthusiast, this is probably not the kind of story you're used to hearing. Most of what gets celebrated about the fungal kingdom, and rightly so, is the good stuff, the mushrooms that heal us, the mycelium that decomposes us and rebuilds soil out of our leftovers, the vast underground networks that connect entire forests. Fungi have spent the last few years finally getting some of the credit they deserve as one of the most sophisticated forms of life on this planet. But fungi were never simple allies, and they never will. The same billion years of evolutionary ingenuity that gave us penicillin and portobellos also gave us some of the most catastrophic crop killers in agricultural history. Tropical Race 4 might be the single most feared one operating right now, not just because of what it does to a plant, but because of what it reveals about how fragile our modern food system actually is. It's doing this to one of the most eaten, most beloved pieces of fruit on the planet, and it is doing it in near total silence. This is the story of a fungus that has already caused one extinction event in the history of food, a fungus that has spent more than 30 decades quietly conquering banana growing regions on 4 continents, a fungus that no known chemical can kill, that can lie dormant and lethal in soil for longer than most of us have been alive, and that has quietly unnerved plant pathologists who, by the nature of their job, do not scare easily. Let's start with something you've probably never thought twice about. The banana sitting on your kitchen counter isn't quite what you think it is.
Every single Cavendish banana on every supermarket shelf on Earth, from a bodega in Queens to a market stall in Osaka, is genetically identical, a clone. In fact, it is, in a very real sense, the same plant, endlessly copied. Here's why. Commercial bananas are what botanists call parthenocarpic and triploid, which sounds complicated but really just means 2 things.
Wait a second. So they produce fruit without needing fertilization and carry 3 sets of chromosomes instead of the normal 2, right?
Absolutely. That extra set of chromosomes is what makes the fruit big, sweet, and seedless, exactly what a snacking primate wants. But it comes at a steep cost. Triploid plants are almost always sterile. They can't reliably produce viable seeds of their own. So, how do you plant a banana farm if the fruit has no seeds?
Oh, well, you don't plant seeds at all. You take a cutting, a sucker or pup growing off the base of an existing plant, and you replant it somewhere else. It's essentially cloning by hand. And banana farmers have been doing it for centuries, long before anyone had a word for cloning. Every plant grown this way is a genetic photocopy of its parent, which is a photocopy of its parent, going back through an unbroken chain of identical individuals.
Yes. On the other hand, for the banana industry, this uniformity used to be considered a feature, not a bug. Every Cavendish plant ripens on the same schedule, grows to the same size, tastes exactly the same, and ships exactly the same, whether it was grown in Ecuador, the Philippines, or Costa Rica. That predictability is precisely what allowed bananas to become the ultra-cheap, ultra-available fruit we take for granted today. It's why the Cavendish alone accounts for roughly 98% of the entire global banana export trade, even though botanists have catalogued well over 1,000 distinct banana varieties. But think about what that uniformity actually means from a pathogen's point of view. Imagine an army where every single soldier has the exact same immune system, the exact same allergies, the exact same genetic weak points. Find a way past one soldier's defenses, and you've found a way past all of them simultaneously, everywhere in the world. That is precisely the situation the global banana industry built for itself. And in the mid-20th century, something found the way in. Before there was tropical race 4, there was just Panama disease. And before there was the Cavendish, there was a banana called Gros Michel. Big Mike, they called it. Sweeter, richer, and by most accounts, more flavorful than the banana you're eating today. By the way, Cole, do you like eating bananas?
Yes, and I love it, but I mostly enjoy it as a smoothie, with milk, honey, and a few walnuts, along with a hard-boiled egg.
I love it too. But in fact, the artificial banana flavoring used in candy and medicine still tastes like Gros Michel, not Cavendish, because that's the variety chemists were modeling when they first synthesized it. The banana most of us have never actually tasted is the one that defined what banana flavor means to this day. Through the first half of the 20th century, Gros Michel was the banana. It dominated plantations across Central America and the Caribbean and built entire economies around its export. And then, starting in the 1950s, a soil-dwelling fungus called Fusarium oxysporum, a specialized strain scientists now refer to as Race 1, began tearing through those plantations one after another. Leaves yellowed and collapsed, stems split open, entire fields of a crop that had taken years to establish died where they stood, and the soil beneath them became unusable for growing Gros Michel ever again.
There was no cure then, and there still isn't one now.
Unfortunately.
Farmers tried flooding infected fields. They tried abandoning them and clearing new forest elsewhere, over and over, chasing clean soil across an entire region, until there wasn't much clean soil left to chase. By the 1960s, Gros Michel had effectively vanished from the global export trade, reduced to a handful of small specialty farms and private collections. An entire multinational industry had been brought to its knees by a fungus nobody could see, hiding in dirt that looked, to the naked eye, completely unremarkable.
The banana business survived, but only because it found a replacement. Cavendish had been sitting around as a minor, less desirable variety, mostly grown as a garden curiosity, valued for exactly one thing. It happened to carry a natural resistance to Race 1. So the industry uprooted a century of infrastructure built around Gros Michel and rebuilt it, almost overnight in agricultural terms, around a fruit nobody had really wanted before the crisis. It solved the immediate problem. Nobody at the time seemed especially worried about repeating the same mistake, planting an entire global industry on top of a single genetically identical variety all over again. That should sound familiar, because it's exactly what happened.
It should also be added that Cavendish's resistance to the original Panama disease lasted for a while, decades, in fact. long enough for an entire generation of growers to forget that fungal wilt disease had ever been an existential threat to the industry at all. But resistance to one strain of a fungus is not the same thing as immunity to the fungus itself, and Fusarium oxysporum F.spec.cubense, to use its full scientific mouthful, had not gone anywhere. It was still out there, mutating, testing, the way fungi have done for the better part of 1 billion years. Reports of banana wilt symptoms on Cavendish plants started surfacing in Taiwan as early as 1967, but for years nobody quite understood what they were looking at.
Yes. It wasn't until that package landed on Randy Plotz's desk in 1989 and his lab ran the genetic comparisons that the scientific community had confirmation of what growers in Southeast Asia had started to suspect. This was a new, distinct strain of the same fungus that had wiped out Gros Michel, and this one had figured out how to defeat Cavendish's defenses.
And they named it Tropical Race 4. And through the 1990s, it did exactly what its predecessor had done 40 years earlier, except this time to the variety that was supposed to be the fix. It tore through plantations in Indonesia and Malaysia. It spread into the Philippines. It moved through Chinese provinces, Fujian, Guangdong, Guangxi, Hainan, and Yunnan, most likely riding along on infected planting material and heavy farm equipment moving between neighboring countries. Within a couple of decades, it had reached Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Cambodia. For a long time, the rest of the world treated this as a distant, regional problem. Southeast Asia's crisis, not everyone else's. That comfort would not last.
To understand why scientists find this particular fungus so genuinely disturbing, you have to understand what it's actually doing to a plant at the cellular level, because it is one of the more quietly brutal processes in all of plant pathology. Tropical Race 4 lives in soil. It doesn't need a host to survive there, and it doesn't need to be introduced through a wound or an insect bite. Its network of microscopic threads can detect chemical signals leaking from a banana plant's roots, essentially sniffing out its target from a distance and grow directly toward them. Once it reaches the root, it pushes inside and starts making its way toward the plant's xylem, the internal plumbing system that carries water and dissolved minerals up from the roots to every leaf on the plant.
And this is where it gets darker, because the plant's own immune response is what actually finishes the job. Sensing an invader in its vascular tissue, the banana plant tries to wall the fungus off. It produces sticky gums, gels, and structures called tyloses, essentially balloon-like plugs that swell up inside the water-conducting vessels to physically block the fungus from spreading further. In a lot of plant diseases, this defense works.
Here, it backfires catastrophically. The plant ends up clogging its own plumbing, cutting off its own water supply in a desperate attempt to fight off something it cannot actually beat. Meanwhile, the fungus is doing its own sabotage from the inside, secreting specialized proteins directly into the xylem sap that appear to suppress and disable parts of the plant's immune signaling, making the whole defensive response even less effective than it should be. The plant, in other words, dies partly by the pathogen's hand and partly by its own. It is drowning in a swamp it built to protect itself.
From the outside, you'd see it play out over weeks. The oldest, lowest leaves yellow first, then wilt and collapse downward around the base of the stem, like a skirt slowly sliding to the floor. Younger leaves follow. Eventually, the thick, fleshy stem, called a pseudostem, can split vertically under the pressure. If you were to cut one of these plants open, you'd find the internal tissues stained a deep reddish brown, tracing the exact path the fungus traveled on its way to killing the plant from within. There is no fungicide that reliably stops this process once it starts. Plant pathologists will tell you flatly that no effective chemical treatment for this disease exists at all. Once a plant is infected, it is not a question of whether it dies, it's only a question of how long that takes.
Here's the detail that turns this from a bad plant disease into something scientists describe with genuine dread. Tropical race 4 doesn't need a living banana plant to keep existing. It can simply wait. As the infected plant dies, the fungus produces thick-walled resting structures called climadospores, tiny biological time capsules built to survive exactly the kind of hostile, foodless conditions that would kill most other microorganisms outright. These spores settle into the soil and effectively go dormant, requiring almost nothing to stay viable. No host, no moisture cycles it can't tolerate, no particular temperature range it needs babied through. It simply sits there, in the dark, waiting for something with banana roots to grow nearby again.
And it can wait a genuinely alarming length of time. Researchers studying infested fields have documented chlamydospores remaining infectious for roughly 30 years. Some agricultural scientists working directly with the disease put the figure even higher, describing soil that stays hostile to susceptible bananas for upward of half a century. Think about what that actually means in human terms. A farmer whose land gets infected today may not live to see that soil become safe to replant with a susceptible variety again. Their children might not either.
Oh my God, this is really terrifying. Compare that to most agricultural soil pathogens, which tend to degrade within a handful of growing seasons once you stop planting their preferred host, giving farmers at least the option of rotating crops and eventually coming back. There is no such option here. You cannot fumigate this fungus out of existence at any commercially viable scale. You cannot simply wait it out on any timeline that makes economic sense for a working farm. Once tropical race 4 establishes itself in a field, that ground is, for all practical purposes, permanently altered, not just for a season or a decade, potentially for longer than the working lifetime of everyone currently farming it. For a while, containment in Southeast Asia looked, if not exactly successful, at least plausible. It was not. Slowly, and then with increasing speed, tropical race 4 began appearing in places nobody wanted to find it. Australia was among the earliest signs that this wasn't staying a Southeast Asian problem.
Yes, in fact, the disease had already devastated the commercial banana industry in the Northern Territory before, in 2015, it was confirmed on a plantation in North Queensland, the country's most important banana growing region, forcing the destruction of every banana plant on the affected property. In 2013 came a jump nobody had a tidy explanation for. The fungus turned up in Jordan, the first confirmed detection anywhere outside Asia.
It had likely been quietly present in the country for years before anyone caught it. From there, it surfaced in Lebanon, then Oman, then Israel by 2016, tracing a path across the Middle East. Around that same stretch of years, it was also confirmed in Mozambique, marking its arrival on the African continent. And then, in 2019, came the detection that the entire global banana trade had been dreading for years. Tropical race 4 was confirmed in Colombia. This was the first time the fungus had ever been found anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, and Colombia isn't some minor peripheral producer. That in America is the beating heart of the global banana export industry, home to several of the world's largest exporting nations. Researchers who had spent years warning that an incursion into the Americas was only a matter of time were, in the worst possible sense, proven right. Peru confirmed its first cases in 2021, and heavy rainfall from a tropical cyclone helped the fungus spread further, eventually affecting hundreds of small-scale organic banana farmers in the country's north.
Venezuela reported its first detections in 2023, with the disease already established across multiple states.
Since 2018 alone, the number of countries reporting tropical race 4 has climbed from 16 to 23, and virtually every plant pathologist tracking this disease will tell you that number is not close to finished climbing. Here's the genuinely unsettling part, though, the detail that turns this story from a story about a fungus into a story about us. Tropical race 4 doesn't spread especially well on its own. It's soil-borne, and soil doesn't travel far under its own power. What moves it, again and again, across oceans and continents, is people. A pair of muddy work boots that walked through an infected field in Southeast Asia and then boarded a flight. Contaminated soil clinging to a shipping container, a tractor tire, a piece of borrowed farm equipment. Infected planting material moved between countries without anyone realizing what was hitching a ride. This is not a fungus that needs wind or wildlife to conquer new continents.
So then, it just needs us to keep doing what we already do: traveling, trading, moving dirt around the planet without giving it a second thought. As recently as early 2026, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization was still warning that the disease remains a major ongoing threat to plantations worldwide, actively endangering livelihoods across Southeast Asia, even as it continues establishing new footholds elsewhere. Let's put all of it together, because no single fact here is the truly frightening part. It's the way they stack. There is no commercially viable banana variety on the market today with real resistance to this fungus. There is no chemical that reliably kills it. Once it's in the soil, it can remain lethal for decades, potentially longer than the lifetime of the farm itself. It has already crossed 4 continents almost entirely by hitching rides on human activity, and it shows no sign of slowing down. And it is doing all of this to a fruit whose entire global commercial supply is built on a single genetically uniform clone. A fruit that generates something in the neighborhood of $17 billion a year in export trade alone, not even counting the vastly larger amount grown for domestic and local consumption worldwide. And it's not only about supermarket snacking fruit. In East Africa, in countries like Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, banana varieties are not a luxury or a treat. They are a dietary staple, eaten daily by tens of millions of people, with the highest per capita banana consumption anywhere on the planet, reportedly as high as 400 to 600 kilograms per person per year. Tropical race 4 is already established in nearby Mozambique. Researchers studying its spread have explicitly warned that an uncontained advance into East Africa's banana belt would represent a genuine threat to regional food security, not merely an inconvenience to fruit exporters on the other side of the world.
This is the kind of math that keeps plant pathologists up at night. Randy Plotz, the same scientist who first identified tropical race 4 back in 1989, has spent much of his career ranking Fusarium wilt of banana among the worst crop diseases the modern agricultural world has ever faced. And given what's happened since, it's hard to argue he's wrong. He has watched firsthand an extinction event happen once already, to Gros Michel. He is now watching the sequel unfold in real time, except this time, the fruit at stake feeds vastly more people, generates vastly more money, and is embedded far more deeply into the modern food system than Gros Michel ever was.
So is anyone actually winning this fight? Not yet, but it would be inaccurate and honestly a little unfair to the scientists working on this around the clock to say nobody is trying. One front is old-fashioned plant breeding, sped up with modern tools. In Taiwan, researchers at the country's Banana Research Institute discovered that when you clone banana plants repeatedly through tissue culture, small natural genetic variations occasionally pop up among the copies, a phenomenon called soma-clonal variation. By screening thousands of these accidental variants for disease resistance, They identified lines with meaningfully improved tolerance to tropical race 4, now grown commercially in parts of Asia. In Honduras, breeders at agricultural research institutes have spent decades developing hybrid varieties by crossing Cavendish-type bananas with hardier, more disease-resistant relatives. And in Tanzania, scientists working with the International Atomic Energy Agency and the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture recently completed an 18-month field trial using mutation breeding, deliberately inducing genetic variation with controlled radiation exposure on a local cooking banana variety called mchare, with genuinely promising early results against the disease.
A second front is genetic engineering, and it has already produced the single biggest breakthrough in this fight to date. For more than 2 decades, a research team at Queensland University of Technology in Australia, led by Professor James Dale, has been developing a genetically modified Cavendish banana called QCAV4. The approach is almost elegant in its simplicity. Cavendish plants carry a copy of a disease resistance gene called RGA2, but their own version stays largely switched off. Dale's team took a working copy of that same gene from a wild Southeast Asian banana relative, Musa acuminata subspecies malacensis, where it's naturally active, and inserted it into Cavendish. After more than 7 years of field trials in Australia's Northern Territory, in an environment already crawling with the fungus, QCAV4 held up. In early 2024, Australian and New Zealand regulators approved it, both for commercial cultivation and for human consumption, making it the world's first genetically modified banana ever cleared for commercial production. Later that year, the research team finally tasted the fruit from their years of work and confirmed the answer to the question everyone had been asking them. It tastes like ordinary, well-grown Cavendish, because at every level except one carefully chosen gene, that's exactly what it is.
A third threat, and one of the most recent developments in this entire story, comes from deep within the banana's own wild family tree. In February of 2026, researchers at the University of Queensland, led by Dr. Andrew Chen and Professor Elizabeth Aitken, published the results of a 5-year breeding and genome sequencing project focused on a wild, inedible banana called Calcutta 4. This scrappy, seed-bearing relative of modern bananas had long been known to carry some resistance to Fusarium wilt, but nobody had pinpointed exactly where that resistance lived in its genome. By painstakingly crossing Calcutta 4 with susceptible varieties and comparing the DNA of resistant and vulnerable offspring, Chen and Aitken's team traced the resistance to a specific region on chromosome 5. Its early-stage science, and a resistance mapped so far, targets a related strain called subtropical race 4 rather than tropical race 4 directly, but it hands breeders something they've never had before, a genetic roadmap and the beginnings of a way to test seedlings for resistance before they're ever planted in the ground, long before symptoms would otherwise show up.
I don't want to interrupt, but it's worth adding this. And then there's the unglamorous but absolutely essential fourth front, biosecurity. Because no cure exists, most of the world's current defense against tropical race 4 isn't chemical or genetic at all, it's procedural. Boot washing and disinfection stations at farm entrances, restrictions on moving soil, tools and vehicles between infected and clean plantations, a hard shift towards starting new plantings exclusively from certified, disease-free, lab-grown tissue culture plants instead of field-cut suckers that might be carrying invisible passengers. None of it is glamorous, and none of it is a permanent solution. But right now, for the parts of the world that haven't yet lost this fight, careful boots and clean tools may be doing as much work as any laboratory on the planet.
Yes, it's worth being precise here, because the headline version of this story sometimes overstates the stakes. Bananas as a species are not going extinct. There are well over 1,000 documented banana varieties in the world, Most of them never sold outside their home region, and plenty of them carry natural resistance that Cavendish simply lacks. What's actually at risk is something narrower and, in its own way, almost stranger. An entire global supply chain engineered, screw by screw, around one specific clone. Ripening warehouses tuned to Cavendish's exact chemistry. Shipping routes and refrigeration schedules built around its precise ripening curve. Decades of branding, packaging, and consumer habit, all wrapped around a fruit that might simply not be farmable at the scale we currently expect, in the places we currently expect it, within our lifetimes. And this isn't some distant hypothetical future. It's already happening at the edges. In Colombia, the disease has spread from its original point of entry across roughly 20 large commercial export farms. In Peru, it has already forced hundreds of small-scale organic growers to watch their livelihoods die in the ground. Farms that in many cases had been in the same families for generations. Gros Michel didn't disappear from the earth in the 1950s. It disappeared from your grocery store, from your kitchen, from the version of banana an entire generation of children would grow up knowing. That is precisely the scale of disruption currently sitting on the table again, except this time the fruit involved feeds a much larger and far more interconnected world.
Here's a reframe worth sitting with, especially if you're the kind of person who already loves fungi for what they usually represent: connection, decomposition, renewal, quiet intelligence spread across vast underground networks. Tropical Race 4 isn't some outlier, some evil aberration within the fungal kingdom. It's doing precisely what fungi have always done, for the better part of 1 billion years, finding the one exploitable weakness in whatever system it encounters, and following that thread with total, patient persistence. A mycorrhizal fungus finding a tree's roots, and a pathogenic fungus finding a monoculture's genetic blind spot are, mechanically, expressions of the exact same underlying biological talent. The horror in this particular story isn't fungal malice. Fungi don't do malice. It's fungal competence running headlong into a structural weakness that human agriculture built for itself, deliberately, in the name of efficiency and shelf life and uniform ripening. This is not the first time a monoculture has met its match, and agricultural history is full of quieter, less publicized echoes of the same basic lesson. Genetic uniformity is efficient right up until the moment it becomes catastrophically fragile. It's the same underlying vulnerability in a different costume that turned a potato blight into a 19th century famine that reshaped an entire nation's population. Every time humanity builds a food system around a single, identical, endlessly cloned organism, it is quietly making a bet against the adaptive genius of the microbial world. So far, across the long history of agriculture, that bet has not had a great track record.
If you've made it this far, you're clearly not just casually curious about fungi. You're the kind of person who understands that these organisms deserve to be taken seriously in both directions, as builders and as destroyers, as allies and as genuine threats. That awareness is worth something. Start by simply paying attention to where your food comes from and how uniform it actually is. When you get the chance, at a specialty grocer, a farmer's market, or while traveling somewhere bananas grow locally, try a variety that isn't Cavendish. Red bananas, plantains, the countless regional varieties most of the world never sees in a supermarket. It won't single-handedly rescue global banana genetics, but it keeps the idea of banana diversity from feeling abstract, and it's a genuinely good excuse to eat something new. Follow the actual research as it develops, not just the panic headlines. Organizations like Biodiversity International, the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, and university plant pathology departments around the world are publishing real findings on this fight on a rolling basis, and most of it is publicly accessible if you know to look for it. If you travel to or through a region where this disease is active, take basic biosecurity seriously. Clean your boots. Don't casually carry plant material or soil across borders. It sounds trivial, almost silly, until you remember that a pair of muddy work boots may be exactly how this fungus crossed into the Western Hemisphere in the first place. And talk about it. Most people have genuinely no idea that the banana in their kitchen is a clone, let alone that it survived one extinction event already and is currently fighting off a second one. Mycological literacy shouldn't stop at fungi are secretly wonderful. It should include, and also, occasionally, they are exactly this formidable when they turn against us. Both halves of that story are true, and both are worth understanding.
Let's go back to where we started. Randy Plurtz bent over a microscope in a lab south of Miami in the summer of 1989, realizing that something in front of him didn't match anything he already knew. More than 30 decades on, we still don't have a cure. Let that sit for a second, because it's genuinely rare in an era where science routinely solves problems that once looked permanent to find one that has simply refused to yield for this long. This is not a solved crisis being restaged for documentary drama. It is an open, ongoing, currently unresolved fight playing out right now across plantations on 4 continents, with real farmers, real livelihoods, and in some parts of the world, real food security hanging on the outcome. But the outcome is not written yet either. A genetically modified disease-resistant Cavendish already exists and is approved for commercial growing on the other side of the planet. A wild, inedible banana relative just handed breeders a genetic map they didn't have 2 years ago. Old-fashioned crossbreeding programs, radiation-induced mutation breeding, and unglamorous boot-washing stations are all in their own way buying time. Whether that adds up to victory depends entirely on whether the science and the funding behind it can move faster than a fungus that has already had more than a 30-year head start and that can simply wait patiently underground for as long as it takes. Fungi have been finding a way into every material, every environment, every seemingly impossible opportunity the planet has presented them with for roughly 1 billion years. This time, the thing they found a way into happens to be one of the food systems we depend on most. That should scare you a little. It scares the scientists who study it for a living. But it should also make you want to keep watching this story unfold, because it is nowhere near finished. Thank you so much for watching. If this video taught you something you didn't know or made you look at your fruit bowl a little differently, do us a favor and hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what we cover next. We're going deep into the fungal world on this channel, the builders and the destroyers alike, because both halves of that story deserve to be told properly. Drop a comment and let us know, did you know your banana was a clone before watching this? And if you've ever grown or foraged a banana variety that isn't Cavendish, we want to hear about it. This community genuinely makes the research behind these videos better.